Leafs fam, what is up? This is the Leafs Convo. I'm Norman James. Thanks for being aboard for this podcast. It means so much. It always does. Mike Augello standing by. He and I are going to get deeper into the conversation that is burning up on our YouTube page right now. Who would you trade? Nikita Zaitsev or Jake Gardiner? Who goes, who stays? Each of those players has reason to stay. Each of them has reason to be moved out. Mike and I will discuss. Plus, what's going on with the Toronto Marlies? They've fallen behind in 2 straight games to the Texas Stars. They pulled out the miracle win in Game 1 of the Calder Cup final. Didn't work that way in Game 2. Are they in trouble heading back to Texas? Plus, a little bit more on the Stanley Cup finals at John Carlson, adding more millions to his bank account. Can the Leafs get into a situation where they can convince him to come to Toronto? Is it even worth it? Plus, John Tavares talk and Forgotten Leafs. I'm ready to go. Mike's ready to go. Sammy the Cat's ready to go. The question is, are you ready to go? Whether or not, let's Leafs Convo right now. And here is our good friend from Buffalo, New York, the one and only Michael Augello. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Norman. I am fine. A little tired from a lot of work this weekend. A lot of in spite of the fact that it's early June, a lot of hockey stuff going on.
Well, you are in the cradle of hockey, from Buffalo to Toronto, from the Combine to the Calder Cup final. You're in the thick of it, brother.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, summer is my least favorite time of the year because there's not much hockey, but there's a lot of hockey news going on. So,
well, lots to talk about. First things first, though, I wanted to get your reaction to all of the reaction that has been generated from our previous Leafs Convo podcast, entitled on YouTube, the Leafs Convo, Who Do You Trade, Gardiner or Zaitsev? What does that tell you, Mike, in regards to all of the reaction that we've been able to generate through this podcast on the topic of trading one of these two defensemen? Don't we want to love our players, or do you think it's just a matter of fans realize that there is a serious issue on a critical part of the team that needs to be addressed in this offseason?
Well, I think, first of all, I think fans react emotionally, and that's understandable because they're fans. But I also think more than ever, they're getting into the idiosyncrasies of a team, and they see, and they factor in things like contracts and things of that nature. So they I think they realize Zaitsev is signed for 6 more years. Gardiner signed for a year. Gardiner could be an unrestricted free agent at the end of next year. Do you want to sign him? Do you want to invest in him? And all these are factors. And that's why I think it generates a lot of debate, because I think, Zaitsev is at his lowest value right now since coming over from the KHL, which is not the opportune time to trade him. And I think he's a better player than he reflected last year. Gardiner scored a career-high 52 points, but we saw in the playoffs that he is still, Jake Gardiner in the sense of the player that makes the brain cramp defensive giveaways, and he's a flawed player. He's a good player at times, but he's a flawed player. So, I mean, fans realize that, and I think that they're hungry for this team to win. And I don't know whether they see Jake Gardiner being in the top 4 of a Stanley Cup winning Maple Leaf team in 3 or 4 years.
Well, what happened against Boston was just so visceral and punishing for Jake Gardiner's reputation. It's amazing how you will have those who invest themselves deeply in the analytics of the game and who see the game through metrics and not necessarily they don't really see the game through a human's perspective. It's basically, well, this guy has these numbers, this guy has these numbers. It's one is better than the other, clearly, and that's where the debate is over Jake Gardiner, because you have those who use analytics to determine who is effective, and based on the numbers, Jake Gardiner is a poster child for very good hockey analytics. Yet people see something totally different. And I think that's the disparity in this guy's reputation right now, Mike. Hockey fans will see what they see even if they don't really understand the underlying numbers. And whether Gardiner has great hockey statistics and you can build a case for him that way, optically, things looked really poor for him in Game 7 against Boston. So is it a matter of, hockey analytics people convincing everybody else that Jake Gardiner is not a problem? Or is it the fact that we saw him blow a tire at one of the most important times of the season? And that's just what we're going to go with on him. And you know what? Underlying numbers be damned.
Well, I mean, arguably, and like I said before, he scored 52 points this year, and that's his career high. But arguably, his best season was last year, the year they played the Capitals in the playoffs, because Babcock protected him. They were protected minutes. He was playing. He very rarely played against top lines. He played him against second or third lines. He got offensive zone starts. All those things that would be beneficial to him. And he finished, I think his plus minus was and I know that's an archaic statistic, but I'm saying plus minus was near plus 30. And everybody said he's much better he's much better defensively because he's not playing against more creative offensive forwards. This year he was less protected. He was played on the he played the most minutes or second most minutes on the team, and he was exposed at times. Now he responded with offense, but that's the thing. It's like it's simply a case of asset management when it comes to Jake Gardiner that Kyle Dubas is going to have to address. Do you want to re-sign him, and do you want to re-sign him at $5.5 to $6 million per year, which is probably the range that it's going to cost? And if you don't, then you can't do what Lou Lamoriello did last year and keep James Van Riemsdyk and keep Tyler Bozak when they're going to walk away and that you're not going to bid on them. You have to get assets for them because it simply doesn't. You're not a contender for the Stanley Cup at this moment, and don't fool yourself.
Well, if Gardner's going to be a part of the process long term, then I think it's a matter of getting something done as soon as you possibly can. Because this guy's trade value, I don't believe, is going to increase any going into a trade deadline. So either piss or get off the pot, as they say, Mike. And that is what is really propelling this debate on our YouTube channel comment section. Our last podcast, the Leafs Convo, who do you trade, Gardiner and Zaitsev, Mike Augello in New York, Buffalo, New York, Norman James in London, Ontario. We're just discussing the fallout from our most recent piece of work, and it's an interesting discussion. Jake Gardiner, again, he's a lightning rod for not controversy, but he's a polarizing figure because statistically he gets the job done, but people don't see those underlying analytics. They see what they see, and they see those blunders, they see those big mistakes, and players who are put in high leverage situations where you can either succeed or fail, those are the ones who either succeed or fail. And unfortunately for Jake Gardiner, in those big moments, the perception is that he has failed more often than not. Mike, one more comment on this and we'll move along. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, yeah, I think, and like the situation last year with Van Riemsdyk, I think the valuation of Gardiner, the highest valuation of Gardiner is at the draft and is July 1st.
No question.
Because it gives them a full, if it's a trade scenario, it gives that team a full year to have Gardiner as their offensive quarterback on the power play and puck rusher. And then work on him for a long-term extension, as would have been for Van Riemsdyk had they had traded him to the Islanders in a deal for Travis Hamonic. If they decide to wait until the deadline, they might get a first-round pick like was open for Van Riemsdyk, but that's not the value that you really need. You can get more now. And you have to and I'm sure Kyle Dubas has made the determination of what direction he wants to go. We just don't know what it's going to be.
Look, first-round picks are fantastic, and if you can get one while you're contending, great. But if you can obtain pieces that are going to be helpful to you in the short term for Jake Gardiner, essentially supplanting him on the lineup with someone else who will take his place, someone you might believe is more effective. Look, Jake Gardiner, this isn't a personal thing. He is a fantastic player, and whether he's traded or not, Mike, come draft day, I don't really care. My whole goal right now, doing this podcast, collabing with you, reaching out to Leaf fans, bringing in new subscribers, is just to keep the conversation going. We're just talking Leafs, man. However, personally, I want to push. I want to help push this organization towards that Stanley Cup, because that's what it's about. That is what it's about right now, and make this team better. And if Jake Gardiner is a part of that, and they bring in somebody to complement his skills with skills that he doesn't necessarily boast or are part of his core assets as a player, then that's fine. If they have to move him out in order to bring in somebody who has a different playing style but will take up his kind of minutes, if it works out, and Kyle Dubas, remember, the chosen one, if he determines so, then I'm cool with that. And let's not forget, Jake Gardiner has players nipping at his heels within the organization who are of the same ilk. Timothy Liljegren, Travis Dermott, you have Morgan Rielly there. So if you do move him out and bring somebody back, it's not like there's a complete void left based on the fact that you are not, that you wouldn't have a player of his particular skill set. You have those players in the fold. This is the Leafs Convo. Mike in Buffalo, Norm in London. I should go with that now, eh? Mike in Buffalo, Norm in London.
Enjoy that.
Yeah, we do this podcast several times a week, and we're just floored by the amount of reaction and the amount of support we're getting. If you're listening right now, you're coming in through Hockey Buzz, do us a favor, hit subscribe to the page. We need more subscribers. We have a lot, and we're so thankful for the ones who've come on board. Tell your friends, spread the message. I mean, we want to get into the thousands of subscribers so we can reach more people and have more people get engaged in the discussions that we are trying to spawn through our podcast. We're just talking Leafs, man. We're also talking about the Marlies, a 2-1 loser to Texas at Ricoh, the biggest crowd to ever see a Marlies game at Ricoh, which is amazing. The atmosphere was good. Mike, you and I were messaging, and you were talking about how the atmosphere, especially on Saturday, was unreal. You know, I'm a little bit concerned about the Marlies right now. They're down to the final 5 games potentially of the season, and in these first 2 games of the Calder Cup final with the Texas Stars, they've fallen behind. The miracle comeback in Game 1 didn't work out in Game 2.
Well, and as I said before the series started, because sort of they hadn't played Texas all year, and obviously out of sight, out of mind when it comes to teams that you haven't seen. They're a veteran group. The 3 guys who did the bulk of the scoring in Game 1 for Texas are 3 players who played on their 2014 Calder Cup championship team, and that's a team that beat the Marlies in the conference final. So, then that's Curtis McKenzie, Justin Dowling, and Travis Morin. So these are experienced guys at the AHL level. They've got some young guys, but it's a very well coached, very tough team, and you saw it from the outset in Game 1. A couple power play goals got them ahead. The Marlies came back. I mean, it was an improbable comeback in Game 1 because it was sort of a wide open game, and that's not the game that Texas plays, and not the game that the Marlies usually play. I think Game 2 is more, I'd say, conducive to what the rest of the series is going to be. It was a 2-1 game. A bad penalty call on a holding the stick penalty to Vincent Laverde in the third period. Power play goal by Texas, and then they really slammed the door, and that's the the 2 areas of concern for the Marlies is at the end of that third period, the Texas defense, team defense, was suffocating to the point that they couldn't get the puck over the red line, couldn't dump it in the zone to get sparks out of the net. And in the first two games, it's a miracle they scored 6 goals without a single point from that big first line of Altonen, Grunstrom, and Andreas Janssen, and they didn't score again yesterday. So they're going to have to find some way to get that line on track, and that's probably, if they're matched up against certain checkers, it's going to be tougher to do that in Texas where they have the last change.
I'm the worst for praising the Marlies in the promos that you see on our feed, and if you subscribe to the podcast through YouTube, you'll see these promos. I'm just trying to give people a heads up as to what we're working on. We're running this thing like a channel, man. I'm the worst at anointing the Marlies Calder Cup champs already, so I'm in that camp where I'm just looking way too far ahead. Mm-hmm. In reality, Mike, what we're seeing is that the Marlies still have some work to do, and this season, the dream season, can be completed in convincing fashion. But you got to get back out onto the road, and you've got to find a way to start popping in some offense. And you talked about Altonen and Janssen, and who was the other one?
Grunstrom.
Yeah, Grunstrom. These are guys that you rely on to produce offense, especially at key times. And the fact that these guys have gone cold at the most crucial of periods during the season tells you that, look, these guys have played a lot of hockey, and that no matter where you are on the schedule, you're going to go into slumps, you're going to get hot, and they need 3 wins. It's just a matter of doing what they've done all season and closing this thing out, wrapping it up, and tying it with a bow.
Well, if you noticed in game 1, the key players for the Marlies were the experienced ones. Colin Greening, Freddie Gauthier, who's been down there for a while. Chris Mueller, who they brought in this year, had a goal and 2 assists, and he played on that Texas Star team 4 years ago. So he knows some of those guys. So it's like, what has to happen, and it's understandable that rookies, young players in the crucible of a Calder Cup final or a Stanley Cup final, if we're talking about Vegas and Washington, sometimes they shrink a little bit. Now, they're 2 games in. They're going on the road. This has been the most successful road team in the AHL this year. They got the league's number 1 goaltender in Garrett Sparks, and we've talked about his future with the Leafs. But I think for sure the series is coming back to Toronto. I don't see either team sweeping the 3 games in Texas. So it could be 3-2. Toronto coming back to win the series, or 3-2 Texas, and Toronto has to win both games to win the Calder Cup. But that was their first loss at Ricoh. They had been 7-0 at Ricoh. They'd won 10 games in a row. So, Sheldon Keefe was pretty even keeled about it after the game. He says, we expect it to be a nip and tuck battle. We don't expect to just go through the playoffs like a hot knife through butter. It's going to be tough, and now this team needs to bounce back.
Well, remember, what you're doing at the AHL level, you hope will pay off with benefits in the NHL. So whether they win the Calder Cup or not, the Marlies have shown to be very successful, and the next phase in the grand scheme of things is to have these dudes go to Air Canada Centre and make some noise at some point. That is the entire philosophy, and the entire philosophy of your AHL organization, and the whole point of that league, right? I mean, the AHL references itself as a development league for the NHL. So the Marlies have already proven that a lot of them are ready for that next level, or at least to take a shot at that next level. So that is done. That box has been checked. The Calder Cup is, to win this thing, is something basically for the players and those devoted fans who've gone to the games week in and week out. So let's not make any mistake. They don't have to win the Calder Cup to suggest that this organization is producing good players or cultivating good players at the minor league level. That's not a known fact. The championship is essentially gravy, and heck, while you're here, considering the season you've just won 10 in a row, may as well win the thing. One more point on this, and we got to move along. Plus, we have Forgotten Leafs coming up.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about player development that you were mentioning, it's simply not just, like in the past, like the 2012 Calder Cup final team that lost to Norfolk. It was Kadri, it was Gardiner, and Jerry D'Amigo, who never made the NHL or made it for cup of coffee. They were the young guys, the guys who were the future prospects. On this team, there's Janssen, there's Dermott, there's Grunstrom, who probably Altonen, who will probably all be in the NHL in the year.
Mm-hmm.
But guys like Trevor Moore, who they signed as a free agent, and Mason Marchment, who they signed as a walk-on as an AHL contract, and now he's got an entry-level deal. I was talking to some people yesterday. They think in a year, maybe they could be in the NHL because Marchment's a big, rangy, quick player. Doesn't shy away from he's a perfect fourth line guy in the new NHL because he's fast and he's tough and he's durable, and Moore is very speedy and very creative and is used on the power play. And I mean, these are role players. These are guys who will be inexpensive, and that a team that's going to be successful needs to generate through the organization for cap reasons and for just talent, just to keep the talent moving. And that's the difference between this organization under Brendan Shanahan and now Kyle Dubas. That from teams in the past, they would go out and spend a couple $1 million on a fourth line guy. You can't do that anymore. You have to generate your own talent.
Yeah.
Doing that.
Yeah, the player production keeps churning, but there are very many capable players at the NHL level representing the Leafs right now, and with this potentially sizable crew knocking at the door, you have to think some will squeeze through and others will be shipped out to other organizations. Look, I have a poster of Gardiner on my wall. I have a poster of Garrett Sparks on my wall. I love these guys. I pray to them before I go to bed. And I'm facetious, but the thing is, I love these guys, but I love the organization more. And if Kyle Dubas, remember, this is the guy that the young generation of Leaf fans wanted to see take over, and I'm fully on board. I think he's going to do wonders, but he's going to be staring at a lot of decisions that are going to throw some noses out of joint among the people, the faction that have been ultimately supportive of Dubas and have advocated him taking over the general manager's role. He has to make decisions that are going to benefit the organization with the purpose of winning a damn Stanley Cup. This isn't about generating more fanboys or just a culture of fans for a Garrett Sparks or a Jake Gardiner. This is about building a team and constructing a team. And when you have an asset like Gardiner, who a lot of other organizations would love to have and would be willing to part with assets they have currently to bring back to Toronto that would help make this team better, then you've got to entertain that stuff. And whether people fall in love with these players or not is another story. Real quick, Jeremy Bracco, what kind of season do you think he had? I mean, he was a guy that a lot of people were really excited about, especially when he went to Kitchener to help them with their run. I know he hasn't played too much in the playoffs. I digress here, Mike, but Jeremy Bracco, what's an update on him? And do you think he's still on pace, developing nicely?
I do. I mean, he was sort of a victim of the success of the team and the depth at forward. But if you noticed, when Janssen got called up, when there were a couple call-ups, Kapanen and Janssen later in the season, he got to play more. And at the end of the year, he was scoring at a point per game pace and playing the power play. Mm-hmm. I think, what's going to happen with this team, there's going to be some natural changeover. There's been some rumors about Ben Smith heading to Europe for a year or two, something like that. I mean, that may happen. He's a UFA, and some players might get moved on, but Bracco is somebody that when he got the ice time, he did score, and he needed to get stronger, and he was playing mostly fourth line minutes early in the year, but he's starting, and he hasn't played much in the playoffs because I think that, they got set on a sort of 12-man group and there has been no injuries, but I think if there was an injury, Bracco probably would have been the guy to go in. So I think he's still on track. I think it's probably going to be another year in the AHL next year, and then I think he gets a legitimate chance if he isn't part of the trade or something like that, because you never know. But if he's still with the organization, I think there's a legitimate chance in, say, 2019 that he gets a chance to make the Leafs.
Wow. Trying to make the Leafs is not easy. Back in the day, there weren't too many delicious cookies in the cupboard, if you know what I'm saying. Now, it's just it's a petri dish, and you have a lot of choices, especially up front. It's on the back end that this team needs to improve, and we've talked about it ad nauseum. And I believe Kyle Dubas is going to make those decisions. Going to be tough ones to swallow for some fans, but at the end of the day, win me a Stanley Cup. That is what I care about most. The NHL scouting combine, was that the best of the best or a snooze fest?
Well, it wasn't a snooze fest. It was, from the Leaf perspective, it's like over the last few years. I mean, they've had a top pick, or last year was 17, but it was so many defensemen and so many. It was a pretty decent and pretty deep draft that there was a little more. Suspense, but this year, I mean, everything was focused on Dahlin because the Sabres have the number one pick, and he's, clearly a number one defenseman. The thing is that, a number of teams that the Leafs will play a number of times in their own division have top picks, and the picks at the top of the draft, and Brady Tkachuk and Andrei Svechnikov and Philip Zadina, these are all players who I think are going to be good in the NHL. So, the teams these are players that we are going to see and see often as followers of the Maple Leafs. I think the one interesting thing, and this is just, there is such a need for center with the Montreal Canadiens, and this is not a center-strong draft. There's one player named Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who is ranked, I'd say, anywhere between 8 to 12. He's a very good player. There is some question of whether he's a number one center or a number two center. He grades out at that. But Montreal's picking third, and they apparently have shown a lot of interest. They like this guy a lot. There's talk that they may take him at number 3, even though he's ranked significantly lower. That, to me, that smacks of a desperate organization, and that's what the Montreal Canadiens are right now.
Are you talking about God's team, the Habs?
Not my God.
The greatest sports organization ever. Good luck to them.
Yeah.
This is the Leafs Convo. Mike Augello, Norman James. Stanley Cup Finals, Game 4 coming up. Caps up 2-1 on Vegas. You know what? I know you've mentioned that you're not pulling for Ovechkin and Washington, but they've got a real opportunity here to, conclude this dream story of the Vegas Golden Knights on a bit of a sour note and win their first cup as an organization. And you have someone like John Carlson, who is generating quite a bit of buzz over what he may end up doing going forward with his career. He's helping his cause. He's helping put more millions into his bank account. And obviously, you see reports on social media from either writers or bloggers, people who are passionate about the Leafs, suggesting that, hey, if in a perfect world, John Carlson and the Maple Leafs could have some sort of discussion post July 1st over whether he could, bring his Stanley Cup pedigree to the Leafs and help address a need for them, that would be tremendous. I mean, is this just pie in the sky, Mike, or do you think, at some point down the line, this guy could win the cup and then maybe bring some of his talents to Toronto?
If I had to opt for one or the other, I would say it's pie in the sky, simply because I think that with his playoff performance, his stock was already high, and the market is not strong in terms of defensemen, so he's going to get numerous teams bidding him up. Now, I believe he's 27 years old, and he's just in the middle of his prime. Right now he'll get more than Kevin Shattenkirk, which was close to $7 million. So you're talking probably 7.5 on a 7-year deal. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the Leafs are in the market for that. There's a lot of talk, and it's been tied mostly to John Tavares, and I still think it's realistic because we know that the Leafs will think outside of the box about them signing a player, a free agent, to a 1-year max deal for, whatever the max is, 20% of the salary cap, because they have a ton of cap room next year, but then the contracts of Matthews and Marner and Nylander, if he signs a long-term deal, kick in, or Nylander's will already kick in this year. But that is a possibility. I just don't see them signing Carlson at 7.5 times 7 years. I think it's too much, and I think they'll go in a different direction.
You make your money based on your track record and what you've accomplished, but it pisses me off too because Kevin Shattenkirk gets all that money. Is he worth all that money? Obviously, a team is going to pay to get him because he's the hot commodity at the time. But if you pay Drew Doughty top-end money or Erik Karlsson top-end money or even PK Subban, you have a pretty good sense that you're going to get your money's worth. But a lot of these guys are so overvalued when they get to the market based on a limited window, and teams are so desperate to fill voids, address needs, spend money. Then you have a guy like Kevin Shattenkirk coming aboard for all this cash. Is he really worth that? But I mean, that's pro sports, right, Mike?
Well, that's the way free agency works. Sometimes you're paying players for what they did in the past and not what they're going to give for you in the future. The thing is with Shattenkirk, there was actually some give and take there. He wanted to play with the Rangers. He only took 4 years, and he got the full money. So he got what the money that he expected to get, which was in the neighborhood of $7 million. But he only got it for 4 years. He could have held out I'm sure he probably had offers from teams for 7 years. And he decided to take the deal for the place that he wanted to go to. So I'm sure that's going to be a factor with Carlson too. And the increase of the salary cap, maybe Washington will, pony up and give him that kind of money. But, I don't know. I think at the absolute least, and I think this goes for Tavares as well, they're going to get to that 5-day negotiating window before July 1st, which will happen just right after draft weekend. And they'll listen to other teams, and then they'll decide, do I want to go back to where I am and take what they're offering, or do I, fly the coop and go someplace else?
Speaking of spending money, not recklessly, but maybe inappropriately, John Tavares is going to make a ton of dollars. And the Maple Leafs already have a ton of prowess and a ton of talent up front. We talked about John Tavares joining the Maple Leafs as a redundant quality. If the Leafs were to spend millions on John Tavares to just further strengthen a strength for the organization, would that be an example of just spending money, not recklessly or foolishly, but in a way that you don't necessarily need to?
Well, I don't think that adding John Tavares to the Maple Leafs would be, like buying an extra set of tires that you may never use. I think it's basically he's one of the best centers in this league. I just think there's two approaches. If you look at what Pittsburgh has done and what Vegas has done to get to the Cup final, neither one of them had number one defenseman. Letang was hurt the second year, and then Vegas is basically a hodgepodge of twos, threes, and bottom pairing guys. I mean, good defensemen, but not number one defensemen. In Washington, they have Carlson, but they're probably going to lose him in free agency. The model is, okay, if maybe you can go with a defense that has a bunch of twos and threes, but you have to have an overload of talent up front, and that's what Pittsburgh had with with Crosby and Malkin and Kessel and all the other players. And that seems to be what Vegas has done. And that may be the only way, if short of, because it's so expensive to get defensemen that you really have to overload up front. And Leafs, have a really great accumulation of talent up the mid, at forward. But really, this year, after Matthews and Kadri, they don't have any centers. And if you could make Nazem Kadri your third line center and sign John Tavares, I mean, that's, you're talking, I think, the best center core in the NHL. So, I mean,
Sorry, Mike. I still, I remember well, and we have video on the Leafs Convo YouTube page. Check out the Leafs Convo, The Vault. And there's a story I did with John Tavares when he joined the Knights back in 2009. The spectacle of his being traded from Oshawa to London,
Mm-hmm.
a deal orchestrated by Mark Hunter, was just something to behold for a junior hockey player. I mean, the hype around John Tavares was absolutely incredible. It dwarfs the hype around. It mirrored the hype around Sidney Crosby when he was coming out. It dwarfs the hype around Connor McDavid, considering Connor McDavid played for the Erie Otters. Just finished Evil Genius on Netflix, by the way. Have you seen that, Mike?
I have not yet.
It's the story about the pizza delivery guy who tried to rob the bank with the collar bomb back in 2003. Check it out on Netflix. Erie, Pennsylvania. The only thing I ever knew about Erie, Pennsylvania was the hockey team. And now I know it for this diabolical bank heist with people dying all over the place.
The only thing I know about Erie, Pennsylvania is that's where I stopped to get gas on my way to Cleveland.
Oh, the guy's a savage, that Mike Augello. Anyhow, it's just one of those things, the John Tavares memory. And what the point I wanted to make was that Nazem Kadri and John Tavares were put on a line by Dale Hunter, and those two worked incredible magic. It remains to be seen. I want some hype. I want some excitement. I want that big event, Mike, that on July 1st or 2nd or whenever. I want to see the ticker. I want to see that notification. Leafs and John Tavares come to terms, just for excitement. I miss the events, and I thought the Leafs have never really gone out and signed that premier free agent. One back in the day, there was still that. They were still trying to figure out whether the Leafs were going to be one of these high-end marquee franchises, and coming out of the Harold Ballard era, the Steve Stavros era. I mean, Steve Stavros turned down signing Wayne Gretzky. I mean, we don't talk about that enough. But and then obviously with the salary cap now, it's harder to sign players to big money because you're minding your P's and Q's. Plus, a lot of these big players who've been drafted and developed by other organizations end up staying there. So this might be an opportunity here for almost a once in a generation chance to make something happen. But whether Kyle Dubas wants to do that, he might want to take just a more conservative approach. And look, the Leafs have all sorts of talent up front, and they might just say, you know what, we don't want to spend that kind of money for what some might think is a redundant piece. However, you just made the case. If you have a center core of Tavares, Matthew, and Nazem Kadri, boy, oh boy, that's formidable. And that's the kind of center group that you could really push forward to make a Stanley Cup run with. Last thing before we go, Mike, Forgotten Leafs. So are you ready to play?
I am ready.
All right. I played for the Leafs in 82-83. 52 games played. I had a mere 2 goals, 5 assists, 68 penalty minutes, and I was a minus 16 on a team that was obviously pretty crappy back in those days. And actually, you know what? I played from 80, 81, 81, 82, all the way 82, 83. I was a defenseman, racked up the penalty minutes. Who am I?
This is a toughie.
Sorry, 80. So he was, let's see, drafted by the Canadiens. He's from the same hometown as Wendell Clark.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is not Barry Melrose, is it?
It is. That a boy.
Well, they're cousins. They're cousins. They are cousins. They're like second or third cousins.
Oh, wait a minute. Isn't everybody in Calvington a cousin?
Yeah, remember Wendell Clark's other cousin is Joey Kocur, and one of the ways that the Red Wings beat the Leafs, I think it was 87 or 88 in the playoffs, was Jacques Demers matched up Joey Kocur against his cousin, and Wendell wouldn't. I don't think he wanted to fight his cousin, so that helped neutralize him in a way. Just bizarre. I had no clue that they were cousins, and it really doesn't have any effect on me whatsoever. I'm actually not that surprised. Okay, and the second question. Mm-hmm. I played for the Leafs in 06-07. Okay. 35
games, 4 goals, 11 assists. I played 1 season. It was cut short by injury. And isn't that the way with the Maple Leafs, especially back then?
Okay, 06-07.
You know this guy.
Yeah. 06-07 was the...
You know this guy.
06-07 was the year that they picked up the...
He won 2 Selke. He won 2 Selkies before he joined the Maple Leafs. Come on.
Well...
You guys have...
okay.
Yeah,
no.
come on now.
That'd be Michael Pega.
Yeah, There you go. Bing, bing, bing. There you Mike Pekka. He was a real force for that Sabres team that went to the Cup final in '99.
Yes,
he was really good.
Yeah, and the thing was like I was all in favor of the Leafs bringing in Pekka, and there was always that that angst between him and Darcy Tucker because going back to 2002 when he took out Pekka's knee, and I think it was in Game 7. But they actually played on the same line for a while, and that worked well. And then I think he suffered a broken leg, and that shortened his season. And
it was in Chicago.
Yeah, I wanted the Leafs to bring him back, and there was talk in the off season that they were going to sign Alexei Yashin as well because he had been bought out by the Islanders, and that would have been a disaster. But anyway, Mike Pekka, good. Unfortunately, only played for the Leafs for 1.5 year. So.
Yeah, he was good. He really hurt the Leafs quite a bit with his play, and then the Leafs bring him in, and then he gets hurt. Mike Pekka is amazing, but he's no Mikko Puka. Mike, we got to go.
Thanks, Norman.
Mikko Puka, Mike Pekka. Mike Pekka, Mikko Puka. Uma, Oprah. Oprah, Uma. That's a reference to when David Letterman hosted the Oscars several years ago. Critics said it was terrible, a disaster, but everything Letterman does is iconic and amazing. Kind of like Mike Augello when he's writing for HockeyBuzz.com. Speaking of, if you're listening to us through the embedded player and Mike's blog on HockeyBuzz.com, do us a favor. Do yourself a favor. Stay a while. Hit the subscribe button. If you're not satisfied, let me know. I'll give you your money back. Thank you so much for all of your support. We have so much great Leafs-related content to come in the days, weeks, and months ahead. It's going to make your head spin. Subscribe. We've got to go now. For Mike Augello, I'm Norman James. And, of course, there's Sammy the Cat just here looking at me, waiting to be fed. This has been the Leafs Convo. Talk to you soon. We out.